two of the new concept arts that was revealed at D23 Brazil focused on the nomadic Wind Traders clan. One of the images seems to be the Wind Traders arriving at the Metkayina, whereas the other image is more within the forest, and it's possibly a way for Jake to return from the Metkayina to the Ometekaya. Avatar Theory here, hope you're doing well and having a fantastic day. And during D23 in Anaheim earlier this year, we got a glimpse of the Wind Traders clan with these floating jellyfish-like structures, but it wasn't a very clear image. I mean, those high-res images still has not been released to public yet, and the only image we got was this one here, like a frontal view and also a brief side view of these floating structures. But this time we actually got a high-res image giving us a proper look at these structures as well as these creatures, which seems to be pulling these gigantic structures. Now, during D23 Brazil, James Cameron did a live stream called in live essentially and described this Wind Trader clan as nomadic and said that they essentially follow trading routes by air using these giant floating caravans or structures, but we've yet to know what exactly it consists of. Now, the first one is definitely the most beautiful and stunning one, designed by the talented artist Dylan Cole, and here you can spot 5 different floating structures. I'm just gonna refer to these as structures for now because we don't know the official word. It could be floating caravans, it could be floating homes, floating villages, but I'm just going to say floating structures. And you can clearly see at the very back there's these tentacles that fall down, which could be some sort of defense mechanism. I mean, thinking of a jellyfish, how it attacks and how it defends itself, you would think that these could possibly be used if any predator or enemy comes too close. And you can see, given that it is almost the eclipse on Pandora, there's these bioluminescent lights showing up all over the structure and even on these sails or fins on the side. Now, all over at the back, you can see some ikrans flying around with Navi on top of them. Nothing really out of the ordinary, but in the front, in the middle, like I said, this is the Metkayina, not only because of these tide pools, but I mean, clearly these are Metkayina given their blue texture as well as their paddle-like tails and arms. And considering this Metkayina is kind of like waving at these floating structures, it could either be them greeting, like welcoming the Wind Traders, or it could be them saying goodbye to whoever is on top of these structures. I say that because of these structures you can see is kind of turning sideways, almost, you know, kind of leaving, especially the one on the far right. You can see all of them are turning sideways, maybe heading the other way, maybe heading to the Ometekaya, but that is just theorized. Now, looking at these structures up close, they certainly have an interesting design, especially the floating creature at the very front. It does seem like there's some sort of harness around the head and side of these, so these flying creatures are certainly pulling these jellyfish-like structures. It's almost like if you think of it as a balloon that's in the air tied to a basket, and then you have some sort of creature pulling the basket in the front, but this creature is flying. So imagine, like I said, a balloon tied to a basket, and the basket is tied to a bird. Now the bird is pulling the basket and the balloon is keeping the basket upright. So in that sense, you have this structure that's floating in a certain direction thanks to the bird, but the balloon is keeping the basket in the air. Does that make sense in any way? It kind of does in my head, so I hope I could explain what I'm thinking. But these creatures certainly look interesting. You see they have some sort of, I almost want to say a side mustache, but what you've seen similarly on lizards or some insect, and their head kind of reminds me of a tortoise. I cannot see any legs on these creatures, so I do wonder if in any way they can easily land on the ground, or maybe they're almost like a skim wing. You know, they can kind of like float on the water, but if they start flying, then they go a little bit faster and then they lift off from the ocean. I don't know. We don't know anything about these creatures, but they certainly have an interesting design. Now, looking at the structure, you can certainly see that it has almost a similar design than the Metkayina village. So each floating structure could possibly house one family, but I really don't know what defense mechanism these actually have. They are certainly creatively designed with all of the weaving and patterns going around, but I can only imagine how this image will be realized on the big screen. Now, as for the next image of the Wind Traders, as mentioned, you can clearly see these are in the forests, possibly heading towards the Metkayina. So the first image could maybe be Jake and his family heading back to the Metkayina, and this is them arriving on top of these floating structures. Again, just theorizing. But here we get a good side look of these creatures, and you can clearly see that the harness goes around the head of these creatures attached to the back of these floating structures, with these massive floating jellyfish-like structures having these tentacles at the back. And you do get a better view of these fins or sails on the side, which almost looks like wings. It didn't really look like that in the first image, but from the side it does look like a giant moth, or like it kind of makes me think of a bat or like a dragon's wings. So I do wonder how these jellyfish-like structure will work. Is it a creature on itself? I guess we'll have to wait until the movie releases end of next year. Now, as for the rest of the image here, there's not much else to dissect. I couldn't really find anything hidden elsewhere in this illustration. And on a side note, this was illustrated by Steve Messing, and a link to both of these will be in the description and pinned comment below. But what do you think of these two illustrations? How do you think the nomadic wind traders will play out in Avatar Fire and Ash? James Cameron did say that we won't see them as much as the Ash clan, so I do wonder if we'll see them in future movies after Fire and Ash, or perhaps even in DLC for Avatar Frontiers of Pandora. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below, and for more Avatar content, have a look at the rest of my channel. Until next time, have a fantastic day and stay safe.